I'm not used to showing the slideshow from Google Drive. It's just a little bit different than PowerPoint when you screen share. Oh. I might just download it. Why I have to let people into the, should I let people into the room? Sarah, you're on mute.
Enter in a couple of minutes, I think.
I think so.
Well, I see Erin, so I'm going to let Erin in because she's one of our presenters. So I'm at least going to let Erin in, but I'll make everybody else wait. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Hello.
And as soon as you're ready, Kessa, I bet we could start letting others in because I think the schedule said this started at 11.
15.
11:50.
I mean, I'm ready on my end.
10:15 Central.
Yeah, if someone on the organization end wants to give me the green light, I'm happy to do it, but I'm good to go on my end.
Can start, I think.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I think you can start, but just a couple of minutes waiting.
All right, then I will go ahead and let everybody in.
Yes.
And I'll try and keep an eye. Am I the only one who can let people in?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I will try. In addition to screen sharing and presenting, I will also try and keep an eye on the waiting room. There's a lot of moving pieces today.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Sarah and Erin, I'm going to go ahead and screen share and then we can get started.
Great. And Kessa, if you have the option to make a co-host, I could watch the waiting room also while you're screen sharing. I don't know if that's giving you that option.
I don't know, but that would be wonderful. Who knew agreeing to be the host held so much responsibility? It was all about the power for a moment, but then it also comes with great responsibility. I am not seeing that as an option on my end. No, Sarah, it just allows me to shift over to make you the only host, not a co-host, but
no problem.
I'll just keep an eye on everything this morning. All right.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to be here with you to talk about the Rural Research Agenda. So the three of us are members of a subcommittee of the National Rural Education Association's Research and Higher Education Committee. And we started working on this research project that we're going to share with you today a couple of years ago. And it eventually resulted in the research agenda that we'll be sharing with you. My name is Sara Hartman, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Teacher Education at Ohio University.
I'm Erin McHenry-Sorber. I am an associate professor of higher education administration at West Virginia University.
And I'm Kessler Roberts. I'm an assistant professor in the Teacher Education and Leadership program here at Utah State University.
And our beginning question for all of you today is, what do you hope to gain from today's presentation? And if you want to unmute and contribute, or if you have anything you would like to put in the chat, we'll keep an eye on that as well. Maybe while those might be going in the chat, we can share what the agenda for today is. So we are going to start off by telling you about the background about the National Rural Education Association. We're going to share a little bit about actually quite a bit about the research process that we use to develop the new research agenda. Then we're going to share the research agenda and its core theme, and then 5 surrounding themes. And then finally, we're going to discuss how the rural research agenda can be applicable across a variety of rural contexts. We see some things in the chat. So more about the research agenda and some of the current work. The future of the rural research agenda, seeing how the REC can line up to work with your research agenda. Awesome. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to answer those questions and provide that information throughout this presentation.
All right, so I will go ahead and just share kind of an overview of the process of the research. And I just wanted to start off by saying that as a team, there were 6 of us, and 3 of us are here today representing all 6 of us on the team. But as a team, we were really committed to making sure that we took a holistic approach for this research. And so we really were quite deliberate and strategic in seeking out a wide range of perspectives in our data sources, our interviewees, our focus group participants, et cetera, so that we could identify a broad range of rural needs and rural research priorities. Again, we took multiple data collection methods to make sure that we really were able to get a broad range of rural educational stakeholders' perspectives. And speaking of that data, just have a little slide here for you on what data we looked at. So we gathered 328 surveys, about 65% of which were pre-K to 12 practitioners. Our interviews, we had 9 one-on-one interviews that lasted around 25 to 60 minutes each. And then we also conducted focus groups. We did 6 focus groups with 4 to 6 participants in each one, and each of those were about an hour. And then once we gathered all of that data, our focus groups, our interviews, and the open-ended survey responses, the surveys had both quantitative and qualitative components. So those open-ended components, in addition to the focus groups and interview data, we coded those by 2 researchers for all of that quantitative data. And then those data sources were then dual coded by the same researchers to ensure a high level of inter-rater reliability. So from that process, 1 core category and then 5 intersectional themes emerged, and we'll talk about those in just a minute.
So as Kessa said, we are part of a larger group, and so I'm going to preface the next 2 slides by saying that the 3 of us joining you are the main qualitative folks on the team. So we are not, we cannot be credited with creating these amazing displays of our quantitative results. It's really important. We worked to get representation across a diversity of rural places. And so you'll see here that we have respondents from each of the 4 census regions. We have more representation from the Midwest in terms of percentage. This is not surprising to us, particularly because we imagine that a number of people participated in the survey while they were attending the NREA conference, which was held in Wisconsin.
So a little bit of information before we present the actual agenda. NREA was formed in 1907 with the goal of providing advocacy for rural people and places. And we're excited to present this, what is the second research agenda from NREA. The first research agenda was a comprehensive research plan for 2016 to 2021. And so our committee tried to answer the call when that research agenda reached its conclusion.
So the agenda that we are presenting for 2022 to 2027 includes one central or core category, which we have called spatial and educational equity, and it's surrounded by 5 major themes that emerged from the data we collection: policy and funding, health and wellness, partnerships and community relationships, a focus on teacher and leader, preparation, recruitment, and retention, and college and career trajectories. You'll see through this diagram that all of these are connected to each other and intersect with each other. That was a really important emphasis across all of our participants to think about practical challenges and research needs, as well as practical innovations from an intersectional lens. That is, none of these is discrete and they all influence one another. And you'll find that spatial and educational equity are infused throughout all of these slides, because even when they weren't discussed as explicit issues, they were discussed as contributing to many of these challenges. So as I said, spatial equity and educational equity are at the heart of this agenda. Educational equity we think about as referring to uneven access to opportunities within schools. Often participants talked about educational equity issues around things like race, class, gender identity. Spatial equity refers to the distribution of resources and access to them across places. So spatial inequity then suggests that in certain places, students and families, teachers and leaders have inequitable access to the resources and supports that they need to be successful. So examples of this might include access to mental health services, access to fresh foods. We can think about food deserts as an example of this. Access to medical care, including access to mental health professionals and clean drinking water. So thinking about where you live or work, does anyone have an example of spatial inequity that they might like to share with the group? While you're thinking, we can move on, Sarah or Tessa, to the next slide, and I'll show some examples in a moment. So as I said, equity was really conceptualized in 2 major forms. So what are some of the inequities related to diverse identities, social and class circumstances present within the schools, and then what are the inequities that schools experience across communities? And so on the next slide, you'll see some examples from what folks who participated in this data collection shared. Some participants you can see talked about the increasing diversity, including racial diversity in their schools, and the need for greater research attention to that topic to help inform more inclusive or more equitable practices. Others talked about the intersections of race and class is really important for research, as well as access to technology challenges faced by English language learners. Thank you. And mental health access. And then for others, it really was this broader inequity inherent in the system. And you'll see references to this last point throughout the 5 themes that surround this central category. So we asked survey respondents to rank topics from the previous research agenda related to their current prioritizing. It's really important to note that this data collection cycle happened through the COVID-19 pandemic, and we want to recognize the influence of that particular time context in influencing participant responses. But you can see, perhaps not surprisingly, that those issues given the highest rank by participants included the impact of policy on rural schools and challenges around particularly teacher staffing. We also used waffle graphs to represent the percentages of each priority level. And so you can see that the dark blue represents the percentage of respondents who ranked a particular category as a 5 or highest priority, down to sort of the dark orangey red color, which is lowest priority ranking. And so across the board, recruiting, retaining, preparing rural educators and administrators was a top high priority issue for all respondents. And then mirroring the polarization across the US around equity, diversity, and inclusion, we see the greatest standard deviation around this category as a standalone category.
Thank you, Erin. A couple of areas of spatial inequity around where I live is access to broadband and preschool opportunities. I'm guessing that others may be able to identify with that as well. So the first of the 5 themes that surround that core theme of spatial and educational equity is partnerships and community relationships. This theme really speaks to the strengths of rural education partnerships, but it also recognizes that partnerships are not without challenges, both within rural communities and also with others who are collaborating with rural communities. Data and this theme pointed to the need for research related to pursuing collaborative partnerships across rural educational settings, including school-university partnerships, university-community partnerships, and school-community partnerships, and then also partnerships that involve all of those contexts. It also is looking for strategies to address partnerships, challenges, and then finally, we know that innovative things are happening in rural communities and schools. And so the research agenda is looking for examples of innovative partnerships that are occurring in rural settings and looking for ways that those partnerships may be applicable across other rural settings. To share a little piece of some of the data in that section, we have a highlighted piece here for you that I want to read. And this says, so I feel like, and maybe I'm naive in believing this, but I really feel like at the heart of this, community connectedness and community involvement could go a long way in addressing a lot of these issues holistically. And that is a comment from one of our focus groups.
Hey, Barbara.
Second major theme, and this was a top priority for many of our participants, was around teacher and leader preparation, recruitment, and retention. And so it's important to note, I think, the severity for STEM educators, special educators, and specialists across the country, but also participants pointed to shortages in administrators, bus drivers, and other support staff in schools as well. Participants also talked about this as a pressing issue prior to the pandemic, but one that was certainly exacerbated by it. Here we have some quotes from surveys and from our qualitative data collection related to the need for research around this issue. One of the survey respondents said this is a high priority because they think lots of other problems fall off once we are able to retain quality educators. Others said without quality people, nothing moves forward. And so this person spoke to the centrality of working to better understand the challenges and success stories around teacher and administrator preparation and staffing that might be transferred to other schools.
All right, thanks, Erin. So the next thing that we found was around college and career trajectory. So respondents identified a few major issues that future research should look into. One, and this has been a trend in the past research, but it continues to be a need, the low expectations of educators and low aspirations of students for post-secondary education or career training. And that's kind of been a long-running theme in this literature. However, there are a lot of things that intersect with those, including access to high-quality information and offerings, course offerings, such as dual enrollment and AP courses and other advanced courses. And not having these courses obviously inhibits the ability to be successful in enrolling and pursuing a higher education degree. Thirdly was a mismatch of learning pathways and credential attainment aligned with the local labor market and technically sophisticated high-wage careers. So what is being taught in schools versus what is being offered in the community as an employment, and then beyond the community as well. And then lastly, the importance of understanding what happens after rural learners leave their schools and their classrooms. We heard a lot from participants about, not being able to know what happens to their graduates after they leave high school means that they don't always know if what they are doing is quote unquote working when it comes to college and career attainment and trajectory. So those were a few things we heard throughout multiple data sources. Again, we have a few quotes here. I'm going to share the top one with you. So this interview participant said, the line between pathways and tracking is one that is a fuzzy line. It needs to be monitored very, very closely. Again, it's all too easy to let prejudice, bias, Black, Indigenous, people of color historically were tracked into lower developmental courses for one reason or another. We don't want to see that happen again. We've worked against that, and we certainly don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater around pathways. So again, there is this tension there between wanting to make sure that we are preparing students for when they leave us, but also not tracking them and inhibiting their potential. And again, just that intersection of equity throughout these quotes is one reason why we picked this one in particular for you. So the next theme is around policy and funding. So again, we saw a few themes that came out in the data. So the first is there was just a broad acknowledgement between the connection between policy and funding. And we almost made funding its own category, but funding really intersects with everything. And so we put it in with policy because it really did fit quite well there. But there are a few particular areas that we need to pay attention to in future research. One is inequitable funding formulas and mechanisms that often disadvantage our small and rural schools. Secondly, how policies serve to advance or hinder more equitable practices for historically marginalized groups of students and families. Thirdly, around politics and local governments. So we heard a lot, and again, situating this within the context of when this data was being collected during COVID, there was a lot of time spent on social media, for better or worse. And so we heard a lot about how, school board meetings being put online to be viewed virtually and be attended virtually often led to really contentious school board meetings that then kind of trickled into the in-person meetings themselves when those resumed. We heard a lot around how teachers are quote unquote allowed to teach about issues and current events focused on race and gender and sexuality. And often, the big school districts are the ones that get the attention in the media, but these same issues are happening in our small and rural school districts as well. And so that was certainly something that needs to be explored in future research. Fourth was a lack of fit and attention to rural context when creating these policies and standards that are often handed down from the state and federal levels and are not considering our particular context of our needs. And then finally, there were discussions of specific policies, and a lot of this happened, we heard participants talking about things happening local to their specific context, whether a state policy or even a local school district policy. So we heard a lot about school consolidation, charter schools, access to dual credit. So again, we have some quotes for you here, and I want to share the first one for you. A persistent theme I encounter when working with rural educators is the mismatch between federal and state policy and conditions on the ground in rural schools and districts. As long as we expect under-resourced rural schools to produce the same results as large, wealthy schools, we're setting rural places up to appear as though they're failing. And I really love that caveat of appear as though they're failing, not that they actually are, but when they're measured by the same yardsticks that our larger schools are, they often aren't able to show off their strengths and the things they're doing quite well.
Thank you, Kessa. The last of the 5 themes that surround spatial and educational equity is health and wellness. And we saw 3 main sub-themes included in this. Those included equity and the ability to access services, addressing emotional and mental health concerns of students, but also for teachers and staff. Unsurprisingly, COVID influenced all of this. We saw this area really connect to areas of spatial inequity, especially as it relates to that first sub-theme, equity and access to services. And that's illustrated on the next slide, where I will share an example of a quote. The dearth of resources in municipalities for health, including mental health, early intervention services, and social support systems, as well as diverse educational programming to support the offerings possible in a rural school district, must be addressed to improve outcomes and access, especially for those facing socioeconomic challenges. And this comment really does reflect the strong connection to spatial inequities that are challenges related to health and wellness in rural schools and communities. And of course, we know that many of these inequities were there prior to COVID, but COVID definitely exacerbated these issues.
Thank you, Sarah. So this slide really highlights the interconnectedness of all of these themes to each other and to spatial and educational equity. So we can think about educational research as an endeavor of better defining the problems we face and evaluating the policies and practices that are attempted to address those problems. In our research, participants pointed to problems that we don't fully understand in all their complexity, as well as the need for solutions to those challenges that we can implement within different sorts of school settings. However, rural education researchers and practitioners recognize that rural schools and communities possess unique strengths that assist them in addressing both context-specific and common equity and access challenges. Equity, both educational and spatial, is at the heart of these challenges, and participant responses really showcase the complex and intersectional ways that different forms of inequity influence health and wellness, teacher and leader preparation and staffing, funding and policy, post-secondary pathways, and possibilities for partnership and collaboration. We see intersectionality functioning really in 2 ways in this research agenda. First, while we felt it necessary to identify discrete topics to be able to form a usable agenda, one of the challenges of defining it is the reality that these topics are not in fact discrete, but rather intersect in complex ways to shape rural realities for educators, students, and rural families. For example, teacher and leader preparation, recruitment, and training, arguably one of the most widely identified concerns by our participants, are intimately connected to many of the other concerns that participants ranked highly or commented on, including rural funding inequities, which affect salaries, community school relationships, which affect housing and community climate, and the health and well-being of students and in-service educators, affecting teacher well-being, turnout, and retention. These intersections make us aware that spatial inequity demands our attention, as it highlights the interplay of the places where we work and live, policies that influence us, and local relationships and resources. Our participants also shared some really important views on how they think research around these issues should be conducted, or the types of research that they think would be most beneficial to their work in the field. In particular, they highlighted the need for high quality research practice partnerships with rural schools and communities, and with rural schools and other institutions, including higher ed institutions. They value research that recognizes the differences between rural places and the changing or dynamic nature of rural communities. They understand that there's some misalignment between the structure of data collection that happens in rural schools, particularly in quantitative data sets, with the needs of rural places. And they're really interested in looking for solution-oriented research that highlights cases of successful responses to these challenges and innovations, and allows for the adaptation of solutions to challenges from one rural place to another.
All right, so we just have a few moments for reflection and discussion, and then we'll move into some Q&A to round out our time together here. So we can just take a moment and just think about the following two questions. And again, you can put them in the chat or you can voice them. You can unmute yourself and voice them. What would achieving spatial equity look like in your rural context? And then more broadly, what are your takeaways?
For me, the point that rural schools lose track of their students after they graduate and not knowing sort of like if they're doing what they need to be doing in order to prepare rural students, that really struck me, especially the way that it matches up with teacher education and how we don't really track pre-service teachers as they're going into rural schools either, to ask them if, you know, what the program did to prepare them, actually prepared them to teach in a rural space, or if the program is still really metrocentric and urban normative, the way most programs are. And so I think that there's a really interesting connection between those two things. And especially with my work with, you know, rural outmigrants and thinking about how rurality transfers across places, especially in terms of like urban sprawl and where the urban rural sort of intersect, and thinking about that, that point just really struck me and was really interesting to me, and now has my wheels turning. So
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I'm a little biased because that's a big part of my research, but I do think it's a fascinating point that we heard several times of, you know, we don't know what we're doing is working or not because we don't know where they're going. Whereas other communities were saying, oh no, we know for the most part where our students land afterwards. So it really is this very different context in different places. So
we do so much work thinking about partnering in teacher preparation and thinking about helping students partner with schools and how they engage in those relationships. But absolutely, that piece that comes after that is something we don't know enough about.
Yes,
In-
absolutely, Lori. So I'll just share out in the chat. Lori mentioned they found the small size of their district has kept us from being eligible for grants. We've also heard about this, absolutely, in our policy and funding theme. And they want those large numbers of free and reduced lunch. Absolutely. They also want just large numbers in general, right? So they want to see it, they want to see it go to scale. And so that often disadvantages our small districts, not the least of which, we need to think about just staffing and how much work it takes to put these grants together. And large districts have multiple people, if not teams of people that are, I've done some work in Houston Independent School District, which is the 6th largest district in the country. And, they have teams of people putting grants together. And we are lucky if we have, a business manager in a district office who 1/5 of their time, 1/10 of their time is maybe looking for other funding. So absolutely. Excellent point.
Lori, also related to that, it can be very difficult as well in rural communities where many schools are transitioning to offering breakfast and lunch to all children, no matter what kind of qualifiers they were looking for. So that takes away that as a measure as well, which is obviously a positive thing that we're, more children are having access to that, but it does change that picture.
Yeah, that complicates it for sure, Sarah. Absolutely. All right. Well, feel free to continue to share and put things in the chat as well. But we did want to leave the last 10 minutes or so for questions and discussion. And I don't know about you, but this is often the part that I love the most about these kinds of presentations. So we wanted to make sure we left some time at the end. So for the sake of, I think, my sanity, I'm going to stop screen sharing so we can all see each other a little bit more, in larger pictures. But we also have our contact information we can throw up there as well if you'd like to contact us outside of the session. But so the space is yours for Q&A and general comments.
Hi, I might just add, we're from the University of Kansas, and I'm just going to say we're really excited to partner with the rural districts. We have a big expanse grant that we got funded from EIR. So we also just submitted another, a secondary grant for a NIDLR grant with SPED. We just see it as just so much potential, and we are so excited to learn. In all honesty, we have been with the suburban and the urban and the bigger districts. So we are really excited to learn from all of you and to get out and really work with all of our rural educators. We see it as a great learning experience for us, and also really getting resources where there's a definite need. So we're really excited.
Awesome. Thank
Great.
you. I'm going to put a couple of resources in the chat. One is the direct link to where the agenda is located. And the second I'm going to put in the chat is a link to a publication in the Rural Educator that also explains the work that went into this research project and the research process, and more information about all of this that we've shared with you today.
Thanks for adding those, Sarah. And then we will have a longer version as well coming out in September in Peabody. So be on the lookout for that too.
Great. Other questions, comments, and we'll also take suggestions for future work as well. So, we are 3 scholars who do this work, it's varying focuses, obviously, but we're very invested in this work. So if you have ideas for work that needs done or partnerships, that would be fantastic. So we will take suggestions or just more questions or comments.
Thank you, Lori. We enjoyed being here. And just a quick shout out to Dr. Catherine Biddle, Dr. Sarah Schmidt-Wilson, and Dr. Pam Buffington, the other members of our research team who are not here with us, as well as Dr. Alan Pratt, who is the executive director of the National Rural Education Association and who has been very supportive in the completion of this work. Okay, well, if there aren't other questions, please do feel free to reach out to any of us. We love talking about this work. It's exciting to us, and we very much appreciate all of you being here with us today and hope that you will find the Rural Research Agenda useful in your own work.
Thank you all for your nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.